Lesson 10, A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, focusing on scenes 8 and 9. It's Mrs. Bart, and we're going to learn together about dramatic structure this lesson. For this lesson, you're going to need a copy of the play Streetcar and your notes if they're in a separate place, a writing pen, a green pen, and whatever you choose to write on, whether that's paper or an exercise book. The learning objectives for this lesson are to develop knowledge on dramatic structure and to explore and analyse the dramatic purpose of Blanche and Mitch's relationship. If you need to get yourself any of the equipment on this slide, press pause and unpause while you get yourself organised. We're going to begin with a do now. I'd like you to get stuck into these 6 questions. Press pause to answer the questions. 2 of them are multiple choice, so you only need to put down the letter that you think is the correct answer. Question 5, there are dashes that represent how many letters are in the missing words. Good luck. Well, here's the answers. Which is not a feature of naturalism? Stylised, exaggerated movements. In this play, we have a lot of them. Stanley stalking Blanche, Blanche's theatrical movements. They're not naturalistic. Number 2, which is not a feature of expressionism, plays that explore sordid or taboo subject matter. That, of course, is more a naturalistic method. Antebellum means straightforwardly pre-Civil War. It's jazz music that's the answer to question 4. And the critic, Felicia Hardison-Londre, if you remember way back when we were looking at the relationships between, first of all, Stella and Blanche, and then Stanley and Blanche, and she talked about those relationships as 2 duets, and the symbolic prop is Blanche's trunk. I'd like you to look at this piece of analysis about scene 8. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to be working with it a little bit later. In scene 8, Stanley, Blanche and Stella become increasingly short-tempered. Stanley shows that he has taken all that he can handle of Blanche and will allow Stella to sway him with her protestations no longer. He is intent on removing Blanche from his house, and he sees no need for delicacy or kindness in doing so. However, Blanche too seems to have reached the limit of her capacity for niceness. She loses her temper briefly when she snaps to Stanley that she has already apologised 3 times for her bath. Her outburst constitutes the first time Blanche openly expresses anger in the play. I'm now going to pass on some key knowledge to you about structural aspects of drama. As you can see from the diagram, and as you probably already know, structure is about how a text is built, in our case, drama. And A Streetcar Named Desire is constructed of 11 kind of episodic scenes. Transition. A transition is the process of moving from one scene to the next. When you actually see a drama in live performance, you'll have noticed that some of these transitions actually involve parts of the set and props being moved about. Confrontation is where you have on stage characters directly engaging one another in open conflict, whether that's verbal, an argument, or physical, as in a fight. Evasion is the opposite of that. It's where characters are avoiding conflict, perhaps running away or hiding from each other, or again verbally trying to skirt around a subject without discussing it. Interruption, when it comes to the dramatic term interruption, refers to a kind of freeze, or more commonly a change of direction that halts the action in some way. So whatever is happening, it stops, and then the action diverts to go in a completely different direction. A revelation, something that we see in novels as well, is when something that was previously hidden and perhaps mysterious and that we've wondered about becomes apparent. It's revealed at a key moment. Again, in novels we have this idea of opposition. In drama we probably use the term counterpoint more frequently, but it's when differences are shown at the same time on the stage. So on the stage you are seeing two things that are very, very different, whether it's two people dressed up in very different costumes, whether it's two very different characters. Counterpoint shows differences all at the same time though. And two terms that you're probably very familiar with, tension and conflict. Tension is of course the bad feelings that the audience feels when something is happening on stage, whether that's trepidation or fear or shock. It's think about your body tensing up because you're very concerned about what's going on. Conflict, of course, is a disagreement of any sort. And now back to that piece of analysis that I just read to you a few moments ago. Here's my task for you. How could you enhance this analysis by using the structural terms that I have just gone through with you in the previous scene? You're going to need to have scene 8 open on the page of your script. You're going to need your green pen, and of course you're going to need to pause while you rewrite and revise this analysis with your green pen to include some evidence and most particularly some of those dramatic terms to develop and enhance this analysis. Off you go. Now we're going to have an exploration together, moving on to scene 9 and thinking about Blanche and Mitch's relationship. Now, of course, in many ways, this is AO1. We are developing our knowledge of the play, but I'm going to have a sort of AO5 emphasis for this, because I want us to see that there are different ways of actually looking at Blanche and Mitch's relationship. So one of the ways of looking at this relationship is that it's a subplot to the main story of that power struggle between Blanche, Stella and Stanley. Now, it isn't a love triangle, it's just a normal two-way love relationship. And you wouldn't really call Blanche, Stella and Stanley a love triangle as such, because they're not all in love with each other. It's a power struggle. But the relationship between Blanche and Mitch runs parallel to what's going on between Blanche, Stella and Stanley. And we can compare the stories. Blanche is trying to develop a relationship with somebody, but that somebody is known to Stella and Stanley, and the relationships cross wires, interfere with each other, and cause disturbances for Blanche and for Mitch. You could also see the relationship as a foil to the Blanche-Stanley relationship. Last lesson or a few lessons ago, we talked about relationships that mirror each other. Now, of course, the strict definition of a foil is a character or characters who are opposite to a key character. And by having them interact with each other, it further emphasises the qualities of the main character. Now, Blanche and Stella's relationship is volatile, is strained, is difficult. Blanche and Mitch's relationship, up to a certain point, up to scene 9, is a kind of newly romantic relationship. They are polite to each other, they are friendly, they're getting to know each other. They're in the early stages of romance. And of course, that kindness that new lovers have towards each other, that fondness, stands in stark contrast to the antagonism between Blanche and Stanley. So that's another way of interpreting their relationship, Blanche and Mitch and their relationship. Another way of interpreting Blanche and Mitch's relationship is to see it being used by Williams as a catalyst. Remember, a catalyst, which is actually a term from chemistry, is about something that speeds up a reaction. And you could probably look at Blanche and Mitch's relationship as something that helps to expose and develops Blanche's character. It's in her monologues to Mitch that we learn about her past and we learn about her fantasies. Last lesson, when we looked at plastic theatre, we learned about the Varsoviana polka. On page 83 in this scene, it returns as a sound effect, but with one big difference, one significant difference. This time it's in Blanche's mind. She's the only person that can hear it, and it punctuates their dialogue. It stops and starts, and the fact that she's hearing it inside her head confuses and disturbs her, and it makes the conversation that she and Mitch are having very difficult and very fraught. Think about all the things that the Varsoviana polka symbolises. Another way of looking at Blanche and Mitch's relationship is how it develops the plot. It brings the play to a crisis point. When Mitch gets upset enough to confront Blanche, he turns on the light to expose her. Of course, we learnt from last lesson that this is a physical, but it's also a symbolic exposure. He does want to see what she really looks like after making the point that they only go on dates in the evening and in dimly lit places. But he also wants to get at the truth, because he's now figured out that she's not this old-fashioned, chaste southern belle that she's always claimed to be. And he's angry at her deception. But his anger is not like Stanley's anger that seethes and burns over time. It subsides very quickly into a sort of resignation. And I think that's because it's clear that he has genuine feelings for Blanche and he doesn't want to stay angry at her for long. But the problem is, and the reason why all of this brings the play to a crisis point, is Blanche's response to his rejection of her. It's explosive. And it's clear from this that she sees Mitch as her last chance of survival in this world where clearly she is not equipped, as she admits herself, to survive in this world without somebody else. Mitch is clear about the fact that it's not her age that bothers him, it's her lack of honesty. So you see how Blanche is now at crisis point, and that of course brings the play to a crisis point, because Stanley's net, if you like, is closing in on her. The advocates that she had are turning against her, and the lies and delusions have somewhat backfired on her. Her antagonist, Stanley, he sees her as a rival for his wife's complete devotion and a representation of the entitlement and the wealth that he's never had as a working class American. As a new American, he wants to destroy her and all she represents. And of course, in order to do that, Mitch had to be turned against her. And so Blanche, at this point of the play in scene 9, is becoming increasingly isolated. So we're coming to the end of the lesson where, of course, I usually ask you as part of our plenary to apply the knowledge that I've passed on to you. So the question I'd like you to consider today is, or the task is to explore how Williams uses Blanche and Mitch's relationship to develop plot and theme. Up to now, I've been asking you to focus on AO1 plus AO2 to get those as good as they can. But because we also need to be thinking about those other AOs, we have started today to think about AO5 and the different ways that you can interpret a dramatic function or feature of a play. I'm going to ask you to develop this paragraph into an AO5 response after you've made your beautiful claim, supported it with evidence, analysed the methods at working that evidence, and then go on to talk about all the different ways that we can perhaps interpret this dramatic feature of Blanche and Mitch's relationship. To help you, you've got the information on slide 7 that you might like to use on structural aspects of drama, plus maybe the exploration notes that you've taken as I've talked to you through slide 8. And if you want to be challenged further, if you want to have a go at really pushing yourself, try to dig deep into the evidence so you're using it more than once. Do you remember my analogy that I often use of thinking about literature as a beautiful jewel that you hold up to the light and you look at for a long time, and you are exploring and saying everything that you see on the face of this beautiful jewel. But what digging deep into the evidence and AO5 asks you to do is to turn the jewel so that you're seeing a slightly different side to it. And then you're asking yourself, what do I see now? Do I see something different now that I'm seeing it from a slightly different angle? So as usual, I'm going to be really interested to see what you come up with, your ideas, your different views on things, and you'll be getting feedback on the paragraph that you're going to submit to me that is AO1, AO2 and AO5. Enjoy your writing.